Thank you all for joining us, and thank you for being on time. I say joining us, it's just me today. I need one person to deliver a webinar. So today we're here to talk about mistakes and how they help us create a culture of continuous improvement. I don't know if you've been receiving our emails or not, the ones we sent over the last few weeks where we've been continuing this theme. You might have signed up to this through social media, however you found it. I'm really pleased you're here and able to join us. We're running this as a webinar because it helps us to maintain focus on the content, but there's the chat function that's fully working. There's also the Q&A function. So if there's something that you want to say as well, pop it in the chat, and I can actually unmute you and promote you to panelists and things like that, so we can chat face to face as well. So there is the ability to turn that on and off. It just makes it a little bit easier to actually run the webinar, especially when it's just me talking. I will take pauses at points and see if there are any questions, and we'll have plenty of time at the end as well. Okay, excellent. So let me just close down this box and we'll make started. So just before we start, a little bit about us. I know quite a lot of you know who we are and who I am. My name's Rhiannon. I'm one of the two directors at DESI. So we're often described as change or transformation consultants, which is kind of true, as long as the change or transformation you're trying to deliver results in improvement. Unfortunately, not all change or transformation does, but we're very much sort of improvement consultants. We're also experienced change managers, and by that I mean all the people that work for us have come from the sectors that we work in, which we call social purpose organisations, which tends to be housing, charities, local authority, anybody that puts people above profits, basically. They all come from the sectors we work in, and they've all done change management roles within those sectors. So they're not straight out of university, they're not career consultants, they are experienced change managers. And fundamentally, our aim is to help organisations continuously improve and adapt to the ever-changing world around them. This is our show-off slide, if you like. Some of you will see your organisations up there. This is the housing organisations that we've worked with, and a couple of local authorities have crept into that slide as well. And some of the charities and health organisations we've worked with as well are up there. Apologies if you don't see yourself, these get quite busy, so we try and mix it up a little bit every now and then. And fundamentally, the work we do falls into three buckets. We improve services. That might be through rapid improvement workshops. That might be through service reviews. It might be through problem solving sessions. We look to develop people and culture, particularly in-house improvement capacity. We call them change practitioners or continuous improvement practitioners. We do a lot with that group to help qualify them as internal change consultants, and we have qualifications they can go through. We do a lot of work with leaders, and we believe in upskilling frontline staff so they can continuously improve what they do each and every single day. Ultimately, we believe that you want to reduce your reliance on any certain sort of external partner to deliver sustainable continuous improvement in your organisation. And that's what that strand of work is all about. And then there's the optimizing your organizational design. That's where larger transformation programs come in. Fundamentally, you start with designing your target operating models and moving towards it. So that's us. That's what we do. And today, though, we are here specifically to look at mistakes and how a mistake, and how focusing on mistakes can help you create a continuous improvement culture. So hopefully everybody's here for that. I haven't seen anybody suddenly drop out, which is always a good sign. But we're going to talk about mistake proofing. We're going to talk about how to approach it. We're going to look at lots of examples, and I do have lots of stories. Those of you that know me already know I like a story. I do have quite a few stories about mistake proofing that really help hammer home the concept of mistake proofing. We're then going to look at how we can preempt and prevent mistakes from happening. And I'm going to finish with practical tips, because that's ultimately what everybody wants, right? You want something you can take back to the workplace and actually implement to help put some of these things into practice, to make it a reality. And that's what we're going to finish on, my 4 tips for practical things you can do today to implement a mistake tolerant culture. Okay, let's get going. So I want to start by asking you to mull over privately whether you're naturally predisposed to being mistake tolerant or mistake intolerant. Okay, so do you have a mistake tolerant mindset, or are you intolerant of mistakes? And while you mull that over, I'm going to tell you a story about Archie. Archie was born before the First World War, and he was a doctor. He specialized in randomized trials in medicine. In fact, I think he was known as the forefather of randomized trials. And he was working in a hospital during the war in a heart attack unit. Okay, and in this heart attack unit, he was trying to identify what the best way to recover from a heart attack was. Now, the practice at the time was that people would recover from a heart attack in the hospital. So you would stay in the hospital till you were fully recovered, then you'd be released home. Archie wanted to see whether people would recover quicker in their own home, so released quicker into their home or not. Now, his colleagues in the hospital were absolutely not happy about this. They often accused him of meddling with patients' lives and well-being. So they weren't happy about this particular trial. They were worried that he'd inadvertently kill patients and make their well-being worse. Okay, so Archie went ahead and he did the sort of preliminary studies, and he gathered his colleagues together to show these early results to them. And he opened this talk with his colleagues by announcing, "You were right and I was wrong. It is better for patients to recover in the hospital than it is for them to recover at home." And his colleagues were furious with him because they thought that he'd, meddled with these patients' lives and had been messing around, and they ordered him to stop the trial immediately. It might only be the preliminary phase, but they want it stopped right now. They can't tolerate this sort of, meddling. And when everything had settled down, Archie calmly announced that he had switched the results around, and that actually it was safer for people to recover in their own home. And he challenged them. He said, "Do you want me to stop the trial now, or shall we continue and get some more robust results?" Needless to say, he continued, and it's influenced the way we deal with heart attack patients today. Now, that story, other than telling us that Archie was a bit of a showman, which we all gotta love, right, tells us that people are naturally mistake intolerant, and that can really hold us back. Okay. Jumped ahead a bit quick there. So for mistake tolerance to be effective, so to be tolerant of mistakes, it has to go hand in hand, this mistake tolerance, with learning from the mistakes you make. And it has to go hand in hand with some action that you take to stop the mistake happening again. Okay, so tolerant of mistakes, but not tolerant of repeated mistakes. Now, organizations, I would call them non-continuous improvement organizations. These are organizations that are normal organizations, if you like, the sort we normally see before we started working with them, have this approach to mistake proofing. Okay, where most of their time and effort is focused on detecting mistakes. A little bit of their time is spent on preventing them, and a tiny bit on eliminating them. Now, let me explain those levels to you. So elimination will remove the need to complete the problematic task altogether. So you're literally taking away the thing that was creating the problem. So if the mistake you were making was forgetting to turn the lights off or forgetting to turn the taps off in a bathroom, elimination is the automatic sensors, so they shut off for you. So you've literally removed the need to actually switch the switch. So you can no longer make that mistake. Okay, so that's eliminated the problem. You've designed it out altogether. So prevention would mean that if the mistake was made, it stops it becoming a defect. Okay, so for example, word processors. Word processors now, well, they used to underline the mistakes you make. Do you remember that in Microsoft Word? It used to underline your mistakes. Now that would be detection, because it was telling you there's a mistake, but it will still let you make the mistake. So it can still become a defect, an error in an email you send or a letter you send. Prevention is where it is now. So what now happens in word processors is it corrects the mistakes for you. So you still make the mistake, you still spell the word incorrectly, but word processors now can replace commonly misspelt words for you. So that's a mistake prevention. And detection, as I say, is about flagging up that you've made a mistake. And it's where most people put their effort. But it is an incredibly ineffective approach to mistake proofing. Because things are often picked up way too late in a process, and it's not unheard of for customers to be the ones that are picking up the mistakes that you've made. Now, mistake detection can often be called lots of things, and you might be thinking, I can't think of many examples of detection in my organization, but you might recognize these words. So audits, checking, supervision, inspections, all of those are aliases, if you like, for detection. It means we are checking things to make sure it's accurate, and that's where people spend a lot of their time. And as I say, it is an incredibly ineffective way of mistake proofing things. And what many people don't know is that the more checks you put in a process, so the more detection you introduce, which is quite often the natural reaction to this check hasn't worked, okay, we'll introduce another one, we'll check the checker. The more checks you introduce, the more ineffective, the more mistake prone your process becomes. And I'm going to give you an example of that. So one of my very first projects working at Odessi, so this is about 15 years ago, when we used to do work in the private sector as well, was with a bank. Now, this is an expat bank, so before anyone worries, it won't be a bank that you bank in. So it was an expat bank, and they wanted us to look at their loans process. The problem was the accuracy of the letters that were going out. And the chief executive of this bank was absolutely, furious with the process. He couldn't understand how there were still so many mistakes being made. And one of the first things we do when we go to any organization is we go and see the problem. And we went to what was the in and out trays in those days. It wasn't sent via email, it was good old fashioned letters. And we picked up the out tray letter, and the first letter we picked up, and absolutely true, this happened. The first letter said, "Dear Mr. Smith," or whoever, "your loan has been declined. The amount of £40,000 will be credited to your account in the next 12 to 14 days. And the chief executive that was with us almost literally started stomping up and down and shouting. He just didn't understand how that mistake could happen. And then we observed the process. And what happened in the process was somebody wrote the letter, and then it was checked 9 times. Because every time another letter was sent out incorrectly or a customer complained about an error, they just introduced more checking, because that was all they could think of to do, was introduce more checking. Now, you might think, well, with 9 checks, how on earth haven't they nailed this problem? Why are mistakes still happening on the letters? But actually, change your mindset about it slightly and you can see how it can happen. So if you're the person writing the letter, it's not your only job to write those letters. Everybody in this bank is absolutely under the cosh, 24/7, really, really, really busy. And they're writing letters, and in their mind, they're thinking, I've got to get through this pile of letters. I've got all this other work to do, but so-and-so is going to check my letter, so it's okay. So they just bang out the letters, mile a minute. They're just fast as they can bang out these letters. And then the next person picks them up. And of course, in their mind, they're thinking, well, that person is a professional and they know what they're doing. And actually, this person's now going to check it as well. And they're also very busy. So nobody actually checks the letter properly. And of course, if you're the last person, and the last person to get this letter was the chief exec that puts his name on the bottom, literally signs off the letter, and he doesn't check it. In his own words, if these numpties haven't got it right by now, I'm going to sack the lot of them. Verbatim, that is, that's what he said. Numpty was very big in terms of a word back then, wasn't it? But that's how the process became so ineffective. The more checks they introduced, the less attention everybody paid it. Now, let me give you an example of detection that was turned into a prevention. Okay, and this was in a grenade factory, and you may well have read this story in one of our emails, but it's a particular favourite. So in World War II, a grenade manufacturing plant, one of the problems was, and this is a bit scary, but absolutely true, that grenades were sometimes sent down the production line without the pin in. Now, we all know what happens to a grenade without a pin in. It would explode, and unfortunately, they ended up with a lot of fatalities. So a lot of people were killed because this mistake kept happening. The pins kept falling out, or the pin wasn't put in at the right time, and it was killing workers. So what they did was they introduced 2 checks per stage in the process. Okay, so every production stage on the production line had 2 checks. So that's a 300% inspection at each stage, because you've got the person that's doing the work that's inspecting their own work, and then you've got the 2 checks as well. And yet still, with these checks introduced, with these inspections introduced, a grenade was sent down the line without a pin and killed a worker. So clearly detection is not the answer. So what did they do? They introduced a special racking system to carry the grenades down the line. And the winner here is that the grenade had to be hung by its pin on the rack. And in case you're wondering, there was like a steel box underneath in case the grenade fell down and exploded, then it was contained in the steel box that was underneath the grenade rack. So there they took an ineffective inspection and turned it into a foolproof prevention. The mistake could still happen, but actually they would pick up on it very quickly. And if they fell off, then it would stop the error becoming a problem. So 100% foolproof at that point. Okay, nobody else was going to die. And if inspection is the only avenue open to you, so you can't always prevent or eliminate the problems that you've got or the mistakes that you make. Sometimes all you can do is detect. And the nursing sector, or the medical sector in particular, is very good at mistake proofing. And if all you can do is inspect or detect problems and mistakes, then having a single check is far more effective than having more than one check. And let me give you an example of that. So medicine distribution in a hospital, they did a study that showed that when you have 2 nurses dispensing medication, it's actually no more effective, in fact, slightly less effective than if you've got 1 nurse dispensing medication. And you can again see why. If you are the only nurse that is giving out medicine, you are concentrating 100% on the task at hand. Because if somebody gets the wrong medication, if there's an adverse effect, it's all on you. Okay, the responsibility and accountability all sits with you. If that's shared, if you have somebody else with you doing that, check, then again, you're slightly more relaxed. Where does the ultimate accountability sit? If I'm feeling slightly off for the day, then that person, you know, will take the burden. It doesn't really work. You need sole accountability for that particular task. And they've also discovered that one of the main reasons that nurses make mistakes when dispensing medication is because they're often interrupted. Nurses in hospital are always in high demand, right? So what they've done is they've introduced a bit of visual management. They wear a coloured tabard that says medication do not disturb. So it's usually brightly coloured. It's completely different to their uniform. And when they're doing medication duty, in addition to putting a sign on the machine that they take round with them, they also wear these coloured tabards that says medication do not disturb, so that everybody, whether a patient or a member of staff, knows not to disturb that particular nurse because they're concentrating on dispensing medication. So the lesson there is, if detection is the only way you can mistake-proof your process, then a single self-check is the most effective approach to take. Not introducing third-party checks, not introducing multiple third-party checks, but a single self-check, because the accountability and responsibility is absolutely clear. Okay. So, there is a fourth approach to mistake proofing, which is called zero impact. And this image is an excellent example of zero impact. So if you can't prevent it, if you can't eliminate it, if you can't detect it, can you make it zero impact, which means it does not have the negative effect that you thought it would? And here's an example. So this car has driven off with the petrol pump from the gas station sticking out of its petrol cap. And what happens if that actually happens? What happens at the gas station is the petrol shuts off at source and that pump disconnects. It has an automatic disconnect, so it doesn't damage the gas station and petrol doesn't leak all over the petrol station floor. So it makes it as near zero impact as it possibly can, because there was no way they could prevent, you know, this happening. They could try all sorts of detection, they could have flashing lights, people can still miss those indicators. So in the very rare occurrences that this happens, because whilst it might be rare, it would be a huge impact if it were to happen, then they've made it as zero impact as possible. And Sam, who's on the thing, has popped a comment in. I guess another consequence of checking is that it pushes responsibility for getting it right into the hierarchy, rather than encouraging the person doing the work to take responsibility. Absolutely right, Sam. And where does that stop? Right, where does that stop in terms of responsibility up the organization? Yes, I completely agree. You want that single self-check. If the accountability for checking it is, is beyond that individual, then there's another discussion to be had. But yes, the most effective way is a single self-check. Yeah, good comment. So yes, this is zero impact errors. And that's a really good example. So if you ever see those driving off down the motorway, you'll know what's happened there. Now, okay, so we talked about what most organizations do. If you want to be continuously improving, a lean organization, then you need to invert that triangle. You knew that was coming, didn't you? We invert that triangle. So we look to eliminate problems first and foremost, mistakes first and foremost, then we prevent them. And actually only those that we can't, we have that detection, that single self-check type detection. So the focus here has shifted to making it impossible for the mistake to happen when detection is only really used as a last resort. Okay, so whether you realize it or not, there is mistake proofing all around us. Our lives are literally surrounded by mistake proofing techniques, both elimination, prevention, and detection as well, and the zero impact, as you've seen. And here are just some of my favorites. So top left, rumble strips on the motorway, it is a detection. So if you fall asleep behind the wheel of a car, obviously catastrophic consequences, but they put these rumble strips on the motorway so that as you start drifting and you go over them, the rumble strips wake you up. Okay, so that's a good one. If you can get anywhere near a petrol station, although it is better than it was, isn't it? Then you'll notice that you can't put, is it a diesel pump in a petrol car? Because the nozzles don't fit. There's a bit of prevention for you. You can still pick up the problem, but you can't actually put it in. Of course, electric cars have eliminated that problem altogether, right? Then we've got bottom right, ATMs. I was going to say ATM machines, but I know that's not right. ATMs, they make you take your card before they're dispensed cash, because people would take the cash and wander off leaving their card in the machine. And my personal favorite bottom left, it is detection, but I do really like this one. So that's a white ceiling paint, but it goes on pink and dries white. So if you're painting your ceiling, you can always see if you've missed a bit, which is always a huge bugbear of mine, because as soon as the light changes, you spot all these slightly yellowy spots on the ceiling where you've missed the white paint, but this goes on pink. So you can instantly see if you've made a mistake. So those are just some examples, but there are, if you Google mistake proofing, there are hundreds. And here's another one that you may or may not be aware of. How many of you know what that little tripod is for in the middle of your pizza? I didn't know this until about a year ago, I'll be honest, when I ran a session like this and a client told me. But that little tripod is there to stop the lid of the pizza box lid sticking to the top of your pizza and pulling all the cheese off. So it's a little bit of prevention there, which is clever, right? Okay, so continuous improvement organizations not only need to be reactive to mistakes they make. So we've been talking about something has happened, how can we stop it from happening again? Yeah, and so continuous improvement organizations would continuously reflect on that. So you need to have a culture where people are prepared to admit that things are going wrong. And critically, to making that happen, and I do mean critically, you need a culture where you label the mistake and not the individual that makes it. And I'll talk about cultures that get that right in a minute, but you have to be able to focus on the mistake and not the individual. The chances are it's the result of something else, not that particular individual that's made that mistake happen, and other people will make it too. So you have to have a culture where you label the mistake and not the individual, so you can look at it and go, okay, what went wrong? How can we stop that happening again? And that becomes a collective effort then. So you're reactive to mistakes, but you're also proactive in preventing them, which means you're always asking, anytime you're going to make any sort of change, any change at all, you're asking what could go wrong and how can we ensure that it doesn't. Okay, so this is the type of thing that could go wrong with this change we're making, and now we need to put actions into place to make sure that those things don't go wrong. Okay, so it's those two sides, reacting to mistakes that do happen, but also preempting and preventing them from happening in the first place. And I've got a couple of exercises that I'm very fond of for doing that, for preempting and preventing mistakes. Now, there are many different ones you could use. And frankly, the most important thing here is that you say, what could happen and what could we do about it? You don't need to use a posh tool. These are very, very simple tools. In fact, they are just ways to structure that line of questioning that will help you identify as many of the issues as possible and get to satisfactory resolutions for them. And the first is called failure prevention analysis. In the follow-up email to this webinar, I'll send you a quick video of explaining this tool and the templates using it. Although, frankly, you could do this in 30 seconds on a piece of paper. But failure prevention analysis is a very simple tool. In a nutshell, we say, what are all the possible failures or problems we might have when implementing this change? And you list them there where you see A, B, C, D, E, F. And you can have as many as you like. So do a bit of brainstorming. What could go wrong is what you're fundamentally asking there. And then you identify two sets of scores. Do all the likelihoods first. So on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is not very likely at all or practically impossible, and 10 is almost a certainty, how likely is that failure going to occur? Okay. Then we move across and we look at impact. So the impact, again, 1 is hardly any impact and 10 is catastrophic. On that scale, what would be the impact if it did happen? So regardless of the likelihood score, so ignoring the score you gave for likelihood, what would be the impact if it did happen? Okay. And then we multiply those out. So kind of like a risk assessment you might do at the moment, you multiply the likelihood and impact scores and you get an overall score for each of those failures. And then what you do is you take the highest scoring ones first and you identify possible solutions. Yeah, what could we do to stop that failure happening? And what you're fundamentally trying to do is two things. Can you stop it? If you can prevent it or eliminate it, fantastic, do that. If you can't, then if it's a high scoring one in particular, then don't ignore it. Say, what could we do to lessen the impact or lower the likelihood? And again, you might put an action in place to do that. So even if you're not stopping it happening, you're making it less impactful or less likely to happen. And the really low scoring ones overall, you might just ignore and you'd say, actually, they're so unlikely and low impact that we're not going to do anything about those. So you don't need actions for everything, just the ones that you perceive to be particularly high. So that's a really easy exercise you can do. As I say, I've got a template I'll send you in a cheat sheet, which will just be a recap that you could share if you wanted. The next one is called solution effects, and I'm particularly fond of this. A number of you might think this looks like a fishbone diagram. It is. Sometimes you see cause and effect diagrams like this. This is basically just the reverse. It's a solution effect. So instead of putting the cause of something and what might cause it, here we're saying, what are we going to do? So what is the change or the solution you're going to put in place? And then we're brainstorming all the positive, negative and neutral impacts of that change. Now we've put here sort of category 1, category 2, category 3, category 4. There are some standard headings you might find useful. Things like money, process, people, environment, materials, things like that you can put on there. So if you were going to implement, for example, customer service training across your organization, you might come to the money axis and you would say, okay, so what is the financial impact of putting in place customer service training? So you'd say, well, you know, we have to have staff out for a day, so there is a sort of financial implication there. Potentially, if we have to backfill or if we have to move people around, there's the financial implication that we have to pay for training, but there's also the financial implication that we get less failures and less complaints, so fewer payouts because people will be better at customer services. So you're just brainstorming the impact. I'm not really interested on whether they're positive or negative. It's everything. What is the impact of doing these things? And you do that against those major categories, and then you'll identify the ones that you need to do things about, and then you can put the solutions next to them. But that's a really good exercise for getting people thinking about what would be the impact of putting in place this particular solution. So not just focusing there on mistakes and failures, but focusing on a more broad evaluation where you can then pull actions out of it. Okay. Any questions on those two just before I go forward? As I say, I've got some rather good cheat sheets and templates for those, so I'll ping them out with the recording after this. No? Okay, marvelous. Okay, so preempting and preventing mistakes, as I say, this all comes back to culture. You have to have that culture where we label the mistake and not the people making it. I've got a comment from Sam quickly, thinking about failure demand. I guess analysing the types of failure demand coming to a service would be detection, and understanding and acting on it would be preventing or eliminating. Yes, analysing the type of demand coming in is the analysis. And then whatever action you choose to take on that could either be detecting. So you might actually say this particular failure comes up a lot. Let's take an example. It might be that the failure demand might be repeated calls about particular repair issues. If I take a housing example, because I can see there's got a number of housing people on here. And actually, you might say that we could eliminate it or prevent it, or you might only be able to detect that error. So you might say that one of the things we're going to do as standard is run a report every month or every week or every day, where anybody that's phoned in with the same repair 3 times within a month, we are going to proactively contact. And that's you detecting the issue. But again, that's detecting the failure and then doing something about it. The problem with detecting it is, of course, people can slip through the net, but it's still better than nothing, because the failure then is that people complain about, repeated problems or problems not getting solved with repair issues. Does that make sense? I think you can do thumbs up and things like that on your... Can you do thumbs up and things? I'm not even sure. Come back to me, Sam, if that didn't make sense. Oh, sorry, I skipped ahead there. So yeah, it is all about culture. Thumbs up, excellent, thank you. It is all about culture, and that being able to detach the person that's made the mistake from the mistake itself. And one industry that's very good at doing this is the aviation industry. Now, hopefully that doesn't surprise you, because of course mistakes in aviation can mean multiple deaths, right? It can mean it's very serious stuff. So the aviation industry has got very good at that mistake tolerant culture, to the point where everybody self-reports mistakes. So if a pilot falls asleep on a plane, which happens more than you might like to think, just saying, but don't worry about that, then they self-report. If they forget to load up with enough fuel, they self-report. And what they don't do is they don't blame the individual. They analyze it all, and they identify things they can do to stop it happening again, using the elimination as a preference, and then prevention, and then detection. And I'm going to give you one story, which was very many years ago, which was where a pilot came onto a flight, didn't fill up with enough fuel for a long journey, and had to make a very hair-raising emergency stop because they ran out of fuel. And when they analysed this, what they didn't do was they didn't blame the pilot. There must be an underlying reason for it. And when they analysed it, they discovered that this pilot had come in, it'd been very cold on that particular day, and they'd taken off their coat and scarf and left it in the cockpit. Which was what they did at the time. And it turns out that the coat or scarf or something had been obscuring a few of the dials. So he hadn't been able to see the flashing light and the indicators that would have told him that he didn't have enough fuel when he took off. Okay, so sounds really unlikely, absolutely happened. And this is the reason now that they have specific places to hang their coats and scarves, as opposed to just leaving them on their chairs in the cockpit, in the flight deck. Okay, because it went back to that mistake, and the improvement they put in place was to have somewhere specific to store belongings, so that there was never the chance the flight deck would become cluttered. Now, I want to compare and contrast this example with NASA of yesteryear. Okay, so again, a very similar industry, isn't that a great drawing, of NASA of yesteryear. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Apollo 13 disaster, whether you've seen the film with, was it Kevin Bacon and Tom Hanks, or whether you actually remember the incident itself. Now, what you might know is that the problem was caused by an explosion. Some of the details you might not know is it was caused by an exploding oxygen tank that had been dropped many years before. In fact, it was dropped just before, during the maintenance before the Apollo 10 mission in 1969. I'm just checking my notes there. Before the Apollo 10 mission in 1969, and that ruptured or it caused internal damage to one of the oxygen tanks that was then used in Apollo 13 and hence caused the explosion. Now, if the mistake had been self-reported, if they'd had a mistake-tolerant culture, not only would that mistake, the dropping of it, have been reported at the time and then never used on a mission, they would also have looked at why the tank got dropped and put things in place to ensure nothing was ever dropped again. But it wasn't. You see, that mistake was allowed to be carried forward, and what seemed like a tiny little faux pas at the time, a little drop of an oxygen tank, of course, very nearly cost an entire crew its lives. So yes, so that is an example of where the mistake-tolerant culture just was not in place. Now, I don't know anything about NASA today, but there's an example, as I say, from the years gone by. Now, big incidents. So these big headline grabbing incidents like these. Now, I've tried to select examples from your sectors, and some of these might be familiar. We see them, you know, there are examples of them nearly every day in the health service, in the charity world, in the housing sector. There's been a few programs on TV recently and in the news. Do you know what the scariest thing about these sorts of headlines is? The scariest thing about them is that it isn't one big thing that's caused this problem. It isn't one big thing that causes this problem. It's the culmination. It's the coming together of lots of little mistakes, lots of mistake acceptances. So lots of being tolerant of mistakes. And mistakes are natural and unavoidable, especially in sectors like yours. All of you come from sectors where people are dealing with people. But what is essential in order to survive really in these sectors is to develop this culture of mistake tolerance. So one where mistakes are designed out of processes and services. And so these headlines are the result of lots of little mistakes, not one big mistake, but lots of mistake acceptance, really. And these organizations aren't bad organizations. They are just too tolerant of the mistakes that are made. And of course, what we do know about mistake intolerance is it leads to people hiding things. They cover up mistakes rather than learn from them, which is why that mistake tolerance is critical. But only if you're then intolerant of repeated mistakes and make sure you put actions in place to stop them happening. And all of these headlines, and you know, there are loads more I found. I just picked out a few to represent your various sectors, but it's not one big thing that led to these events. It is lots of little tiny mistakes, lots of ignoring things, which nobody does anything about until it becomes too late and until you get headlines like these, which makes it scary because it means you can't see things like these coming. You can't recognize, you know, when that big headline grabbing mistake is going to happen, because it's the adding up of lots of little mistakes. I always think it's like Tetris, which is what this image is here. You know, if you think of each of those individual sets of blocks as a mistake, okay, it's a mistake, and it just layers on top of other mistakes, and the resulting big block you get is a massive incident. But like I say, what is particularly scary about that is, of course, that you can't see it coming. And so mistake tolerance will only lead you down one path, where as an organization, you try and play it safe. So you never take any risks. That's one impact. And the other is that you never improve anything. But if things do go wrong, and they will go wrong because they go wrong in every organization, as I say, in sectors like ours, where it's people dealing with people, it's that much more likely. The tendency will be to cover up and to ignore it until you can't anymore, and until you've got that big incident. So must learn from and improve mistakes, and all of that comes down to culture. Okay. So The good news is continuous improvement organizations develop a culture where you identify and learn from all mistakes that happen in an organization, all problems, and you go around your continuous improvement cycle where you identify problems, plan what you're going to do, you take action, you check that it's had the desired impact, and then you standardize and put that into practice. Okay, now I want to come back to our 4 tips. Okay, so I said at the start I was going to give you 4 things that you could do to develop a mistake tolerant organization to get you off the starting blocks. And I know some of you are well off the starting blocks. Some of you here today, because I'm just having a quick gander at the names that have joined, are from organizations that I know are well started, down this path. But 4 tips for how to create that mistake tolerant culture. Sam, I will come back to that question, I promise, right at the end. So the 4 tips, and then I will come back to those questions. So there's some really good questions in the question box at the moment. So how to get started. First tip I have is to discuss problems and solutions every day. Don't leave it for team meetings. Don't wait until you have that big incident we talked about to discuss things. Talk about them every day. Now, this is hard for a few reasons. One, when people are too close to problems and mistakes, they don't see them. And I can give you an example. We do problem solving at SE every single day, as you'd hope, as I'm preaching this to you. But the other day, it was one of my consultants that came and said, I've got this problem and it should be on our information center. And I've been grappling with this problem myself, probably for months. And I just hadn't recognized it as an actual problem and put it up on our problem solving board to discuss. And it wasn't until I heard somebody else say it that I recognized it as an actual problem. So sometimes you have to have other people label them as mistakes or problems for you. But discussing them regularly will help you, to identify problems and to deal with them. So I recommend a 10-minute daily stand-up with your colleagues. This can be physical or virtual, same time every day. Everybody that's available joins. We do ours at 8:30 every morning, and we have a 10-minute stand-up. First part of that is always problem solving. We might have nothing to say on the subject, but we at least make sure there is no updates or no new problems that we need to allocate. Okay, and that can be physical, it can be virtual. You can set these up using in Teams and SharePoint. There's a tool called Planner, and you can set up buckets so you can have, new problems, problems in progress, problems complete. It can be that simple. There's also a free online platform called Kanban Flow that you can use in the same way if you haven't got MS Teams or the Microsoft package. And you can just walk through that and tackle your problems on a daily basis. And if you want to know more about that, search for information centers on our Knowledge Hub, which is on our website. I'll send you a link to that as well. So that daily discussion of problems and solutions is a really good way to get started. Second one is use those tools. Okay, we talked about solution effects, we talked about failure prevention analysis. Use them. Anytime your team, your colleagues, your peers, your organization wants to introduce a change, try one of those two tools. If you want more, I have more, but those 2 are particularly simple and very effective. But use those tools just to sit with some colleagues and to brainstorm those possible failures or the impact that your particular change might have. Okay, so use the tools which will help you preempt and put good actions in place to stop problems happening in the first place. And then my last set of tips, one is share your own failures. Particularly powerful, particularly these 2 tips are particularly powerful if you are a leader. Okay, if you're trying to lead by example, then sharing your own failures is really important because you're trying to, again, encourage that culture where people are happy to talk about their failures. And sharing your own is a very effective way of doing that. And another leadership tip is to go and see the work in action. Okay, so it's literally a technique called go and see, which means you visit the place that people are actually working and you spend some time just observing. And it's an incredibly powerful thing to do, to just observe. I know a number of you probably already do this. I had well, I was very lucky recently to be in an animal hospital, and I went and observed an operation on a pit bull. It was well, it's a hysterectomy, spaying, is that what they call it? Spaying on a pit bull. Watched the whole thing from the point they were prepping this lovely dog until it was in recovery. I had to stand quite a way back, and I was fine until they whipped the womb out, and then I felt a little bit queasy. But really interesting exercise, not because I know anything about animal surgery, but I could see the problems and observe them in action, which the vets that I was working with had just started to accept as the way things were. So, for example, when they were trying to sedate the pit bull, they went and got one set of clippers, and there are 3 of them holding this dog because they're quite strong. The first set of clippers didn't work. Okay, so now one of them's got to release the dog, go and get a second set, comes back, and the second set makes such a loud rattle that the dog gets spooked. And then they have to spend the next 10 minutes calming the dog down while they find another set of clippers, and then obviously prepare to put the cannula in. Now, that is a problem, right? If the equipment they've got actually makes extra time on the operation, then there's an issue. And then the next issue was when they were doing the operation, the vet changed needles 3 times. And just, part of what you do is you want to try and understand the work as best you can. So I said, oh, do you need different like needles and threads for the different layers that you're sewing up inside the dog? And she said, no, it's just these needles were replaced for cheaper ones a while ago, and these bend. So I need to replace the needle. And I bet you they weren't 3 times cheaper. So that go and see is particularly effective. And another example was I was doing go and see with a director of housing, and we went out with 2 lettings officers. And there it was at the point in the process where they were getting the dimensions of the property to put an advert out for it. And we went into this property, me and this director, we're doing the go and see, and these 2 lettings officers. Now, this director had been privately to me, going on and on about why do they need 2 people to do this visit? Why do they need 2 officers? Surely it only takes 1. I don't understand why it's so ineffective. So we went to see. And first thing we saw was one of the officers standing at one side of the room and the other standing there with a pen and paper. And one of them started leaping across the room. And the director, very politely for her, because she wasn't always that polite, said, can I ask what you're doing? And they said, well, we've worked out that one of her leaps is a meter. So we're measuring the room. And the director sort of spluttered a bit, but basically got to the point where she asked, where's your thing? The laser measurer. Where's your laser measurer? Why don't you have a laser measurer? And they said, oh, well, we were told that there's no budget for things like that. And of course, she's the budget holder. So she does something very powerful at that point, which she pulls out her iPad and says, this is ridiculous. You need these to do your job. How many do you need? How many are in your team? And she ordered them there and then. Okay, so she removed the barrier that team had been encountering, also removed a misconception, solved a problem. It was fantastic, all through a little bit of go and see. And the last one then was in a call center where a director was doing some go and see, and it was encouraged activity. I said, feedback, let us know what you learn. And they were listening, and there were 2 different types of people in the call center: the people that could deal with rent arrears and the people that could deal with everything else. The calls were coming through, and the rent arrears people were overwhelmed. So the other people started picking up the calls to see if they could help. And a call came through, and it was someone that wanted to make a payment, and they had to say, I'm sorry, I can't deal with that. I'll transfer you to the other team. And the director said to them, why can't you deal with that? And they said, well, we only have a certain number of licenses for our payment system, and we've been told we can't have any more. That was the only thing that prevented them from being able to have the whole team able to take the calls and what split the team fundamentally. So again, director, they're the decision maker. They bought the licenses, trained up the team, and all of a sudden that problem was eliminated. So go and see, particularly where you're trying to develop that culture where people identify problems and learn from them, allows you to be enabling. Yeah, it allows you to say, I'm seeing that problem. What can I do to remove that for you? Then people start to get more comfortable with identifying problems for themselves. But go and see as a leader is a particularly effective tool. Okay. I've got a couple of comments. So that kind of brings us to the end of the content I wanted to cover, which is pretty much bang on time because we've got 10 minutes left. So I'm just going to have a read through the chat and the Q&A. If anybody has anything to add, then please do. So the first question, regarding culture, where does psychological safety come into this? People need to feel safe to report mistakes without fear, embarrassment, retribution, blame. It'll be held against them. Absolutely. You've absolutely nailed that there. That's what the culture needs to be, a supportive one. That's why I say you always label the mistake, not the person, in order to make this a mistake tolerance work. It does tend to be more of a leadership culture that needs the improvement, because it tends to be them that you report the mistakes to. If you use my recommendation here of discussing problems and solutions daily, the team needs to be comfortable discussing it, amongst themselves, that here are the problems they've got. And again, you need to talk about problems in a very neutral way, not I did this, but this happened. Yes. So it's partly in the way you talk about it, but also there needs to be complete agreement that that's what you'll do. What you really can't do is this in isolation, where a couple of people agree that they're going to start talking about, mistakes more openly. If there is, a leadership culture that goes against that, because then, yes, they might, it might clash. But yeah, there has to be that psychological safety in that culture. Are some mistakes good in relation to innovation? Absolutely. 100% agree. That plan, do, check, act cycle, it's all about innovation for me. Continuous improvement, innovation, whatever you want to call it, it's about improving things. And you cannot be 100% sure anything is going to have the result you want. And sometimes actually it's easier to do a little bit of planning and then do something, check the results, and then act on what that tells you, rather than put lots and lots and lots and lots of effort into the planning when you still can't be 100% sure that what you've got will work. It's about testing it in a safe way. And I always ask the question, what's the worst that would happen? Right? If this really didn't work, what's the worst thing that would happen? And if it's not that bad, then yeah, just do it. Just make sure that you do the checking and the acting from it, so you can make sure that whatever you end up doing does result in an improvement. But yeah, absolutely, some mistakes can be good in that actually they lead to a better outcome. And then we've got system thinker Russell Ackoff used to say that errors of omission lost opportunities to improve are more critical than errors of commission. Yeah. Errors of omission. How do you, yes, you don't know what you don't know, do you? That's interesting. Errors of omission lost opportunities to improve by not taking action. Well, a continuous improvement organization will always be improving. So they're definitely errors of omission. Sam, can I unmute you so you can tell us a little bit more about that? Can you just give me and that's okay, because I think people might be interested in that. I know he's there somewhere. Well, sorry, Sam actually might be she. I don't know, Sam. Sorry, Sam. Sam, can I put you on panelist? Okay, I won't do anything until Sam comes back to me. Oh yes, him, sorry. Can never be sure. I've got a Sam on my staff at work, and it's she, her. Promote to panelist. Does that work? There we go. Hi, Sam. You can unmute yourself now and pop your camera on if you like.
Hello. Yeah, thank you for everything so far. And I seem to be the one hogging all the questions, so I hope other attendees don't mind that. Yeah, it's just something I think it's often not really considered in organizations, is we look for things that have gone wrong from someone kind of doing something. But often there's a lot of missed opportunities because people in organizations are reluctant to kind of take action for, I guess, all sorts of reasons. There might be a fear of risk. There might be just can't be bothered. So I wonder if, and I've not come across it, but I wonder if there are ways of sort of identifying that, where because we didn't do something, we missed out on opportunities. So therefore we need to kind of learn from it. Or I'm not quite sure. It's not kind of fully formed in my head.
So it's a really interesting point. The first thing that sprung to mind was that, you know, you don't know what you don't know. But I suppose what I'm assuming here is that this is sitting alongside an organisation that is continuously looking for improvements and opportunities. So the meet every day for 10 minutes to discuss problems is part of an information centre. Part of an information centre for me will always include measures. And so your measures will show you your opportunities for improvement. So I don't like targets, you know, lines in the sand. Basically, here are the things that matter. Anything less than perfection is an improvement opportunity. And I suppose, yes, if you know, you're constantly sitting below perfection, it's, you know, why aren't we taking action there? And there is your opportunity, you know, your missed opportunity potentially. Now, sometimes people deliberately don't take action because to get that last bit of improvement, you know, the cost benefit analysis is way out. You know, to do that, we'd have to automate something that would cost us £500,000, and, you know, we're just not going to do that. But yes, otherwise, how do you identify lost opportunities? It's a good point. I suppose if you deliberately take a decision not to do something, and sometimes, you know, options are taken, aren't they, to teams for consideration, you'll know about them and you can say there's a lost opportunity cost there. Other than that, I don't have any other thoughts. Does anybody else? I can see some people that I know and some people that I don't. Anybody else have any thoughts on that? I'd love to bring in another perspective. Any thoughts? It's a really good question though, Sam.
Thank you for the answer as well.
That's all right. I'm going to look at Russell Atkoff now after this call. Okay, lovely. So, I mean, did anybody have any other questions that they want to discuss about mistake proofing and developing that continuous improvement culture? No, we've got a quiet lot. You're all watching Loose Women at the same time, aren't you? That's fine. Okay, in which case I will stop sharing. And I will say thank you very much to everybody that's joined us today. I hope you found it helpful. If you don't subscribe to our emails, please do, because apart from anything else, you'll be first to hear about new webinars and things. We are just publishing now our next year program, so we're not going to do them quite as last minute anymore. I'm just sorry, I don't know how to change your rollback, Sam, so I'm gonna have to leave you there. So you'll be able to subscribe to them. We've got a number of different ones coming up. And yes, if you have any suggestions on how to make these better, I'd love to hear that, because again, continuous improvement, need to know those things. There is a quick 2-question survey when you exit this Zoom webinar, which would be really helpful. It'd also be good to know whether you find the webinar format better or the meetings format where we can see everybody. We changed to this because we had some comments that some people found it distracting looking at other people. I'm less keen because I can't see you all, but you know, hey ho. And I don't just want to see myself, basically. So yes, I will send you from today this recording and the materials that we discussed. And if anybody has any questions that they want to tackle on a one-on-one basis, then please do get in touch via email and I will get back to you. Super. Otherwise, have a lovely day. Take care.